We just want to welcome you to New Beginnings tonight from Lower South Carolina, where residing pastor is Pastor Tony Buck. It is the fastest growing ministry in this town. We thank God for that. We thank God for the Prince of the Lord already being in this place, and how already in the assembly as we come in, we came before the Lord and we begin to share with each other about our experiences and how God is moving in our lives, to take out those things that He wants out and to put into our hearts and lives those things that He and what we want more of Him in our lives. On the other night we were talking in Genesis, the 30th chapter, about a family, and that's exactly what we were talking about tonight. Earlier was our family life and how we've been born in sin, shaped in iniquity, and been impressed by those things that have been wicked and evil, and how it's done a number on some of our lives, some of the areas in our lives, and some of the family members in our lives, and even those that have come in contact with us. A lot of times the way we observe things and the way we were shown and taught and the way we did, it caused things to erupt in our lives and made issues come about. Just as well as when you have something in the skin and you have, we call it a rising, and there's something underneath your skin that sooner or later, the bigger it gets, finally it has to be pressured and that stuff has to come out, and then finally healing begins. And that's really what God's been doing in our lives, you know, actually over the last many, many years. But now with the presence of God and prophecy being unfolded so quickly, God's doing a quick work and He's cutting short in righteousness. But just to get an overview of Jacob, he had two wives, Leah and Rachel. He had loved Rachel, but Laban had hoodwinked him into taking the other sister, who was not so attractive, and although she was the eldest, she was not the choice pick, but Jacob had to take Leah as the first wife, and then finally Rachel. But all while he loved Rachel. But I noticed today in the Word that it never said anything about Rachel really loving him. She had many, many things about her which were deceptive, just like her father, and adulterous, just like her father. But Jacob still loved her, and both these women were used and was necessary for the work and will and purpose of God at that time. The first verse of chapter 30 is, and when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said unto Jacob, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead, who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And we find out here two issues in Rachel's life, that even though Leah was the weaker one, not very attractive one, God had shut up Rachel's womb, although she was loved. And Leah was the one that had really begun to bring forth the children. And Leah, in her life of bearing children to Jacob, she was in love with Jacob, but Jacob did not love her. And Jacob actually lived with Rachel rather than Leah. You know, they had two dwelling places. But she was constantly trying to win over the affections and attention and love of Jacob, but she never did. But she did live longer than Rachel, because Rachel, you know, she had passed on. But here we're seeing that even from the beginning of where the scriptures were written, shows that in family lives you're going to have problems with brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers, you know, humanistic things, not just spiritual things. But I mean, they are spiritual. But we see too where this actually propelled on Rachel to continue wanting what she really wanted, and that was to be a mother, and Leah also to have more children, because now they could begin to send in their concubines, and because one way or another she was gonna get what she wanted. You know what I'm saying? That's pretty much like Sarah. Sarah had sent in Hagar to fulfill, but of course we know that didn't work out because Ishmael and Hagar was sent out. But verse 6, and Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. Now, Dan means judging. And then, but these were to her concubines. It still wasn't from her. These were from women that had been sent in. And then Rachel, then also from the next handmaid that she had had, verse 8, and Rachel said, with great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I prevailed. So see, it's not just a thing where it's with her husband, it's with her sister. It's also, it's preventing them all from really getting along because of the issues of their life. But God uses these issues. He actually breaks it on down and begins to use these things, because finally you go on down in verse 14, where one of the sons of Leah goes out and get these mandrakes, and see, because of superstition, Rachel goes ahead and takes these mandrakes, where she felt if she ate those then she'd become pregnant, but then she sold off her own husband for a night with Leah. Of course, that was a wife too. But you see, there was some gambling going on, superstition, going back and forth. And verse 17, just as an overview of all this for time's sake, verse 17, God hearkened unto Leah, and she conceived and bare Jacob the 5th son. So you see, with all this foolishness, even though she sold off the night to that particular night, she took Rachel took the mandrakes, and she thought if she ate those mandrakes that she would then become pregnant. But actually, Leah became pregnant that night. So I thought that was pretty interesting too, because God is working in through the tapestries of all of our lives. We think it's going to go one way, but it really goes another way. And you're like, what is that for? Why would you continue doing that? But see, God still held back Rachel because he had a time and a purpose for the 2 children, Joseph and Benjamin. There's all, and I can imagine God standing back and saying, I wonder what they're going to do. But you see, he is watching, because God hearkened unto Leah. He's seeing that Leah is crying out, I want to be changed. I want him to love me. If the dowry is larger, they have more sons or daughters, then the husband is naturally going to tend to want to go towards them. But Jacob still did not. So it was still they were striving. And dropping down to verse 22, after Leah had her sons and also now a daughter on top of it, verse 22, and God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her and opened her womb. So finally, they're going to get what they want, but it's in God's timing. It's for a work and a purpose. So a lot of times he brings you to the end of yourself, knowing. And I tell you, Rachel had it going on with her husband. I mean, he loved her. But, it wasn't the love that she really had wanted. It was now a child to bear for what? Because if you have the husband, what about the child? But see, it was the fulfilling of the desire of the heart of God in Rachel and Leah both. And that is what's so awesome. So a lot of times we're thinking, well, God, if I just wasn't like this, or if that was out of me, then I could go on and do what you want me to do. We have these speculations, or we have these thoughts about how we think God wants to use us, or when we'll be used, because we have prophecies that are hanging over us, and words been spoken. We're waiting for God to use us, and there has to be a part of us that has to be done. And well, if they were just out of the way, then that could be me, or that should have been me, because 20 years ago this happened, and what about this? We go on and on, just like their lives. They were thinking back and forth. The envy, the jealousy, the bickering, and the heart's striving. But really, in all that, in your flesh, you'll come to the end yourself. And then finally, God is going to have his way in your life. And that's what I like about God, because he will always work out circumstance, situation. Really, when Jeremiah 11:29 came alive to me, that I haven't expected in, it was when I was one of the most weariest, tiredest, sickest, faintest. Forget it, it's all over, it ain't nothing happening, I don't even really care if it does. Finally, then God began to